Welcome back to Mind Your Own Business. We're going to talk today about data management in our pursuit of understanding management information systems and of applying management information technology to your business. Before we do that, though, we have some news you can use. Now, you'll remember that last week in our Because You Asked, I mentioned that our news you can use this week would show how getting together with venture capitalists isn't always a bad thing. Now, we have in the past on this program said to be wary of venture capitalists simply because you're giving up the equity control of your business when you receive venture capital. However, I'm going to point something out here, and this is from a study by Coopers and Lybrand, which is one of the big 6 CPA firms. And they do trendsetter barometer interviews. And they did these with the CEOs of the 434 fastest growing small companies over the last 5 years. Now, 18% of those had received venture capital. These all showed superior growth rates to the 82% that had not received venture capital. In addition, of the ones that had received the venture capital, 76% had either gone public, made an initial public offering of stock, that is, or were planning one. Whereas of the 82% that had not received venture capital, 45% had either gone public or were considering it. So you can see faster growth rate, quicker to become a publicly held company. There are obviously some kind of advantages, something to be said for receiving venture capital. And I think, now the Coopers and Lybrand study didn't say this, it's just a matter of personal opinion and experience. But I think if you really dug into it, you'd probably find that the 18% that had received venture capital both had the inputs of the venture capitalist's experience and were forced to take a closer look at themselves and a more jaundiced look at themselves because of the venture capitalist's involvement. And as a result, they cut out a lot of fat that some of the other companies may have kept. Now we want to talk today about data management. And I hope that we have enough here to fill a show with. Actually, it doesn't look like much. But data has 5 key characteristics that are very important to the business. First of all is the accuracy of the data. Inaccurate data, ask any economist. Inaccurate data can really mess you up. Ask any scientist. Some inaccuracies in data have really made a mess of various decisions, whether in business, whether in science, whether in economics, whether in politics, all because the data was bad. So you really need to be very careful that the data that you're using is accurate. Double checking, triple checking, rechecking before you use it again, all that is extremely important. Also, data needs to be useful, it needs to be complete. Here again, we've had some problems that have arisen. I've seen problems arise in businesses because decisions were made based on incomplete data. I said, well, this is what we have. Well, no, there was more to be had, but they didn't bother to dig in, So they didn't find out these other little things. As a result, they had good data. It was accurate. It just wasn't all there. And it caused bad decisions. And I have, at least in one instance, seen a company literally end up in Chapter 7 liquidation bankruptcy because of incomplete data. The data has to be relevant. An extreme case of this would be of irrelevant data would be trying to correlate the discovery of that Martian rock with little single-celled fossils in it down in Antarctica to the rise in unemployment in Lincoln County. There's absolutely no correlation. Anybody could see that. But trying to do an econometric study correlating the two, you'd be using irrelevant data. Similarly, you want to make sure that the data you're using is relevant. If you're trying to, we've talked a lot lately about small businesses offering securities. If you are actually considering an initial public offering of stock in your company, which maybe your company is just a plan, maybe it doesn't even really exist yet, believe it or not, you don't have to have an operating business to offer securities. If you did, a lot of big companies that had to start out fairly good sized would never have existed. MCI, Sprint, you know. But irrelevant data. You could, if you were back to our example of considering an initial public offering, if your offer is too big, if it's over 10 million, Regulation A doesn't apply. If you're still trying to do it as a Regulation A offering, you're going to be spinning your wheels. If your offering is only 750,000, then that can be a Rule 504 offering. Why would you want to go to the extra trouble and expense of an S1 filing, a regular securities filing? That wouldn't make sense either. But if you used irrelevant data, if you used regular SEC regulations instead of Rule 504, you might go to the extra expense. My gosh, it could cost you every penny that the issue was going to be worth, just for legal fees, underwriters' fees, promoters' fees, filing fees, and whatnot. Also, data needs to be timely. We live in a very fast-paced world, and things change. Man, do they change. In fact, earlier, well, this being June now, in May, we were supposed to do a series of seminars. In April, we were supposed to do a series of seminars. Both of those had to be canceled. Our website said we were going to do them until very close to the time to do them, and then we had to cancel them. People needed to go back to our website and see that those had been canceled. Otherwise, they'd be trying to go to seminars we weren't holding. Data has to be timely. They couldn't visit our website in February, say, oh, wow, they're going to be holding a seminar in Lewiston, Idaho on April 10th. I'm going to go. Because the April 10th seminar in Lewiston had to be canceled. They'd have been going to nothing, because they didn't use timely data in making the final decision. Data also needs to be verifiable. This is sometimes called auditability. There are any number of times somebody will tell you this, you know, they'll tell you something. They'll give it to you as gospel truth. before you use it to make a business decision that is going to affect whether your business fails or succeeds, that's going to affect whether you become Denny Washington or the homeless guy down on the corner, which is going to affect whether you're going to make money or lose money, demand to see the evidence. Study it. If you don't understand it, find somebody that does and have them explain it to you. But verify what's being said and make sure that the data can be verified. Data that can't be verified is useless. We talked about this before in market research. There have been cases where firms would do a market study and then find out the market was nothing like what their study said, and they'd go back and start verifying, and they'd find out that sometimes up to 90% of the questionnaires filled out by a specific survey worker, the people who they were supposedly filled out on had never talked to that person. They didn't call, they didn't go by, they just made something up. Now, had they just taken the step of taking a random sampling of each worker's questionnaires, calling the people back the same day, verifying not only that they had answered the questionnaire, but that the answers that were there were the answers they had given, they would have had an accurate market survey. And they would have made good marketing decisions. But we said when we talked about market surveys, to verify the information, well, here. Data that's going to be used in life and death decisions for your business needs to be verifiable. If you can't see the evidence, if you can't take a random sample, verify it and be reasonably sure then that the data as a whole would be verifiable, don't base a decision on it, because you can kill your business, and that would be a great way for one of your competitors to get rid of you. Either hire one of your employees to give you bad information, or sneak well, you'd probably have to be a little bigger for most businesses to undertake this, but sneak a corporate spy in to give you bad information. So make sure you can verify the information. Find out the source, check with the source. Don't just take somebody's word for it. Now, there is a certain hierarchy that is used in data management, again, with regard to computer systems. The smallest piece of data is a bit. A bit is a binary code. By binary, we mean it's either 1 or 0. That's all it can be, on or off, 1 or 0. Now, by putting bits together, and you'll see 16-bit processor, 32-bit processor, 64-bit processor, that tells you how many bits it's capable of using to make 1 byte. A byte is generally we look at a byte as being 1 character of information. That's not always true, but it would be reasonably close. In a 16-bit system, that would be 16 ones and zeros. And which ones were ones and which ones were zeros would tell you what that byte was. That wouldn't tell you much, but it'll tell your computer. Okay? Then when you put a whole bunch of bytes together, you get a field. Now, for instance, a bit, 1 or 0. Okay. Now you have a 16-bit system, which is extremely old technology, but let's still go with it. You have a 16-bit system, and it's 1001, whatever, stands for the letter J. Okay, so the computer understands that as the letter J. That's a byte. That's a J byte. Okay, now the computer has 3 bytes, J-A-Y, makes up a field. My first name. Actually, my middle name, I won't tell you what my first name is. Then it has another byte, space. Then it has 6 more bytes, W-A-G-N-E-R. Now you've got an expanded field with my name. Okay? The reason I say that's an expanded field is because that doesn't move up yet to a collection of fields that makes a record. Well, it could if the record were just going to be my first and last names and nothing else. But if you wanted a whole bunch of other information about me, and let's face it, J. Wagner would not be of much use by itself. So you've got all this other information, maybe my address, maybe my phone number, maybe my email address, maybe the Northwest Business Development website address, maybe a fee schedule for what we do, our consulting and such, according to the size of your business. Maybe some information on some of our programs, maybe a schedule of our upcoming seminars, maybe a program schedule for Mind Your Own Business, maybe a set of notes for an episode of Mind Your Own Business, whatever. Anyhow, all this stuff you put together and you have then a record. A record is an accumulation of fields having to do with one object or one entity. A database then is made up of records. A database is a logically arranged group of records, like a file cabinet. If you look in an old technology office that doesn't have any computers, they will have file cabinets. And if you open a drawer, the drawer may say A to M, for instance. Okay, if you open the drawer, then you'll find all the files that the file name starts with the letters A, B, C, D through M. Okay, that's the A to M part of their database. You pull out any of those files, you've got a record. Maybe they use file inserts, or maybe they just use sheets of paper. You open a file, each sheet of paper would be a field within that file. Or the file may be sectioned, and each section could be a field in that file. Then you could get down to each character on each piece of paper being a bit, a byte, a part of that field. Bits really wouldn't apply in this case. But that is basically a database. And that's the high end of the data hierarchy. Data management has one objective. It has a lot of ways of accomplishing that objective, but it has one objective. Am I going to tell you how to accomplish it? No, because it's different for almost every business. I would have to come into your place of business, look at your management information system, and say, okay, here is where I think you could make changes to improve the system. Other MIS consultants might come in and tell you something completely different. Somebody that specializes in MIS that's management information systems, that come in and tell you something totally different from what I said. And because they specialize in MIS, I might consider them more right than I. Because, let's face it, I'm a general business consultant for small business. To specialize in MIS, no, I don't. As a result, they might know more than I do. They might be up on some things I'm not up on. And they might be able to fill you in on some things that I didn't know. So I might be making a decision or a recommendation back to, with incomplete data. But I can tell you the objective of data management, and it's always the same. I don't care who you are. It's to make the right data available at the right time to solve business problems and exploit business opportunities. There is no other reason why you have data management. There is no other purpose for a file cabinet. There is no other purpose for FoxPro or Paradox or DBase or any other database program that you might use on your computer. There is no other reason for accounting records, really, when you get down to it, but to make the right data available at the right time to solve business problems or exploit business opportunities. Having said that, I think data management is pretty well covered. Why don't we move on to Because You Asked and see what kind of an answer we can give. Our question for today. I'm planning to open a small bakery, but I'm having trouble finding financing because most bankers seem to feel that the prices of ingredients are too volatile. Sounds like a major league excuse to me, but okay. Is there a way for me to control the effects of price volatility without carrying huge inventories of perishables that might go bad before I could use them? In other words, what you're saying is there some way that I can guarantee that, or some way that I can hedge against increases in the price of ingredients so that I'm not selling my wares too cheap? Yes, there is, as a matter of fact. I want to take you back in history for just a minute. Way back when, there were some very big mills, very big producers in food products. They were companies like General Mills, General Foods, Kellogg, Armour, Swift, that did absolutely no production of grains or livestock, but were strictly processors. Now, they had the same problem. How do I control the market or make sure that the market can't hurt me? Farmers, on the other hand, who were producing the livestock and the grain also had this problem. How do I hedge against getting hurt by the market? If it's a bad market, how do I... Insurance would cover against crop failure. But they needed to know, how do I make sure that I can sell my crop for at least what I need to break even? From this was born futures contracts. Contracts originally between producers and processors of agricultural products, where maybe General Mills said, look, you're planting 640 acres of wheat. You expect that to yield 40 bushels or 50 bushels to the acre. We'll do that to make it easy. So we're going to contract with you for 3,000 bushels of wheat. We agree to pay $3 a bushel. You have to deliver the wheat by such and such date. Now the farmer was bearing some risk, the risk that his crops would fail and he'd still have to deliver 3,000 bushels of wheat, and the market would be high and he'd lose money. But he had done away with another risk, and that was the risk that the market would drop under a bumper crop and he wouldn't break even. The mill had also accepted a risk, the risk that the market would be low and they'd still have to pay this farmer this higher price for the wheat, but that offset another risk, that the market would be high and they'd have to pay a lot more and either raise prices or lose money on their products. This developed into the Chicago Board of Trade futures market. Now you could, and this is the legitimate use of futures actually, you could hedge your ingredient prices by using futures contracts. Do you have to take delivery on the contract, or do you have to deliver on the contract? No, you trade the contract, not the commodity itself. What you would be doing, you'd be accepting the risk of a lower market where you would lose money because you now had to pay the higher price. But you'd be locking in that price instead of one higher yet. Next week, transaction processing and management reporting systems. Till then, mind your own business. Welcome back to Mind Your Own Business. Today we're going to talk about transaction processing and management reporting systems as we continue our discussion of management information systems. But first of all, we have a little bit of news you can use. The White House Conference on Small Business, one of the things that they came up repeatedly during that conference was the need for small businesses, especially in technology sectors, to be able to access capital quickly and easily. Because of that, the Small Business Administration, and in specific their Office of Advocacy, is sponsoring something called ACENET. Angel Capital something or other network. I forget just exactly what it is. The system gives small businesses better opportunities to access venture and operating capital through the securities markets. Now that's key. It's through the securities markets, so you do still have to, so you do still have to manage to comply somehow with any SEC or state securities regulations prior to an offer being published on ACENET. If you want to know more about ACENET, and something wrong with you I think if you don't, you need to visit their website. And that's http://ace-net.unh.edu. You can also get there through the Small Business Administration's website, which is http://www.sba.gov. And I found it through the Office of Advocacy's page, but there's also, I understand, an ACENET logo type thing on the main home page that you can click on. And you can find either the SBA's website or ACENET also on the links page of the Northwest Business Development Corporation website, which is http:// you knew that already, right? www.marsweb.com/MYOB, as in mind your own business, this show. Okay. Having discussed that now, and given you that good news, let's talk a little bit about transaction processing and management reporting systems. Now, a transaction processing system is a system that processes the detailed data necessary to update records of fundamental operations. Remember, when we talk about data, data goes into records, and these records go into a database. Now, the transaction processing cycle, it's a 5-step thing. There's first of all data capture. You've all gone to the supermarket or anymore to department stores. You've gone to buy something, you found what you wanted, you took it to the checkout, and they scanned it. Beep. That was data capture. What that did was, just in scanning that little barcode, the computer was able to tell them what they sold, what it was worth, what they sold it for, what it cost, how many they still had in stock, if it was time to reorder, if it was a seasonal item they didn't plan to reorder, a ton of information was captured right there for updating the database. The next thing that happens after data capture is data edit. That's where the data is checked for accuracy and completeness. This is also, in our example of the supermarket or the department store, generally done pretty much automatically, and I'm going to tell you it's partly your responsibility as the customer. So you want to be careful. I have gone into supermarkets to buy something, and they scan the barcode, and the wrong product name or the wrong price comes up. If the wrong product name comes up, usually the wrong price will as well. Now, a lot of times the checkers don't even understand how important it is that this data be accurate. But I do. And I have said, well, that's the right price. But the bottle you just scanned, for instance, I'd be buying, say, a 2-liter Dr. Pepper. The bottle you just scanned, that's the right price. It was, 99 cents, but even though it gave you the right price, it gave you the wrong item. It came back up saying Coca-Cola or Sprite or something of that, and it isn't. Now, while you're not going to overcharge me or undercharge me on this transaction because the price is right, that inaccurate data is going to mess up your inventory records. It's going to mess up your sales records, not total sales, but item sales. So therefore you need to make a note of that for correction, that Dr. Pepper is ringing up a Sprite. That will bring you into the third step, data correction. The error is found, then they go back and correct it. Whoops, somebody up in the office says, we fed both Sprite's barcode and Dr. Pepper's barcode in a Sprite. We're going to think we're selling an awful lot of Sprite and no Dr. Pepper, and it's going to mess up our reorders too. So they go in and correct the way it is in the computer. Also correct the quantities on hand, and this may take physical inventory sometime that evening to do it. But they correct the data. Then there's database maintenance, which is updating the database using the corrected data. Now, a lot of times, if you've got data correction, that will be part of it. Database maintenance in these barcode scanning systems also is something that's done immediately. So only corrections have to be made. Otherwise, the rest of it's already done. For instance, if they scan the Dr. Pepper, it comes up Dr. Pepper, it comes up the right price. Then everything's fine. When they scanned that, it updated it. It maintained the database. It told the database, you have one less Dr. Pepper and 99 cents more cash. And it was just that simple. Then you have report generation. That's documentation of your transactions, and the reports may be generated in several different ways, which we will talk about later in this show. But that is a transaction processing system. That's the cycle it goes through: capture, edit, correction, database maintenance, and report generation. There's two different ways that data can be updated. There's batch update, batch transaction update. Really isn't used much anymore. It is, but it isn't much. It's usually where it's used, it's either inconvenient to automate things or impossible to completely automate things, or the company has had a batch processing system for years and years and they're too cheap to change it. You generally don't find batch processing in retail stores anymore. You generally won't find it in, well, you may find it in some wholesalers, but very few. Contractors, though, will quite often use batch update because, let's face it, they have a bunch of building materials around that they're going to use to build a building. Now, construction is tracked for accounting purposes by almost the same way as manufacturing, which, raw materials inventory, work in process inventory, and finished goods inventory, although most contractors don't have a finished goods inventory. But they will have a security interest in, and therefore, for all practical purposes, ownership of a building that they are working on until it's completed, less anything that they've been paid toward that building. So that's similar to a work in process inventory. And they will have materials that they've purchased and not yet used and not yet been paid for the construction of that building, and that will be a raw materials inventory for all practical purposes. So they may use a batch update. They may say, okay, because let's face it, they use these things in batches. If they're building a house, they're not going to scan one sheet of plywood or one sheet of particle board that they're using to sheath the outside walls, or one 2x4 that they're using as a stud. They're going to take the things as a batch, build a wall, and then they may update their inventory by batch update. Okay, we built this wall, and it took 57 10-foot 2x4s and 12 sheets of half-inch plywood and 12 sheets of 5/8-inch drywall. And see, they'll update all the building materials that they have on hand according to that. Now, fasteners, things like that, usually aren't kept by the item, they're kept by like the pound. So, and they'll estimate how much of that they've used. But that's a batch update, and it's used almost exclusively by firms like contractors and some wholesalers that don't do things in item lots, and that have no reason to use interactive update. Interactive update now is what happens at the supermarket or the department store when they scan that barcode. The scanner there, the little bed, with the red lights in it, links directly to the store's computer system and updates the databases, the inventories, the sales, a ton of different databases like that. The transaction is processed immediately. There's no, well, last week this is how much we used. It's updated now. Now, there's a lot of different places where transaction processing systems are used. Some of the more common are order processing. We've just talked about that to some extent. What you see when you're standing there at the checkout stand in Target and they scan the barcode, what you're seeing is order processing. What's actually happening is order processing, inventory control. If you paid by credit card, accounts receivable. General ledger is being updated. If those salespeople are on commission, there's going to be some payroll and some human resources update. There's, so this system is actually doing a lot of is actually operating several different systems. What you're seeing is one end of it. But they're used in order processing, they're used in inventory control, in accounts receivable, in accounts payable, in payroll and general ledger and human resources. Sometimes you'll have the same system used for a lot of that, especially the accounting data. Inventory control, accounts receivable, accounts payable, payroll, and general ledger. Peachtree will do all of that. QuickBooks will do all of that. I haven't had a chance. I get a lot of email from people who are registered users of an accounting software program called MYOB. And because our email address is myob@marsweb.com, for some reason they think we're the ones that publish that software. So I get probably 3 or 4 email messages a week from people with questions about MYOB. It does all those things. It's accounting software. It has to. DAC Easy does. DAC Easy Lite. Real World is on and on and on. Human resources. There are human resources transaction processing systems. A few punches on the computer keyboard, and that terminated employee is completely gone. That new hire has a complete personnel record started. Yeah, whatever. That raise or that promotion is entered. Now you go from transaction reporting or transaction processing systems to management reporting systems. Remember we said the transaction processing cycle ends with report generation. So the end product of a transaction processing system then is the management reporting system. That will generate detailed reports where every transaction for the period is reported. You should see, oh boy, detail report for a large retail store. I once saw a detail report for the Neiman Marcus store in Dallas. This was the detail report for 1 week. It was like this much paper. every item sold, how much it was sold for, how much it cost, how much the sales commissions were, everything was on that report, line by line. Then you have summary reports. Summary reports would have taken the Neiman Marcus detail sales report, and this week we sold this much. It cost us this much. We paid this much in commissions and made this much gross profit. Just that simple. Almost an income statement. And all just that quick. Then, of course, there are exception reports. Exception reports tell you when there's something wrong. Exception reports don't say a thing as long as everything's right. As a transaction processing system, let's look at the computer numerical control machining in the Boeing plant. You have an operator who feeds in the data. What he wants machined, how he wants it machined, the specifications it has to meet, the non-destructive tests that have to be performed, etc., etc., etc. He feeds all this into a CPU, computer processor. Remember, we talked about hardware. And this processor says, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Somebody set a block of aluminum on the turret. So they set a block of aluminum on the turret, and the computer proceeds to operate, say, this turret lathe and machine this part. And machine it to these specifications. Now, it has had data capture. When the operator first told it the specifications for that part to meet. It's had data edit because it automatically prompts the operator to check those specifications, make sure they're correct. It's had data correction because if the operator noticed any problems, he fixed them. It's had database maintenance because now it has that part in memory. From now on, if he wants to machine some of those, all he's got to do is punch a button or pull up a file and then say how many of them to machine. So the database is maintained. Also, the computers that control the machinery in the Boeing plant automatically tell the inventory system, we just took 20 10-pound blocks of aluminum out to the turret lathe, which, for machining into whatever they're being machined into, part of a landing gear maybe, I don't know. So now you've reached report generation. The CNC system itself, now leaving out the other systems that it feeds to, like inventory control, where it's moving items from raw materials inventory to work in process inventory, and from work in process inventory to finished goods inventory, or actually to another work in process inventory having to do with not this part but the whole aircraft or the whole subassembly of the aircraft. But the CNC system that operates this turret lathe by itself only generates one kind of report, and that's the exception report. That's where the machine says there was a problem with the cutter and the part fails test. We have an exception here. Something went wrong. So here's a report telling you something went wrong. That is also one of the 3 possible report triggers within a management reporting system. An exception report is one of 3 types. The exception that triggers that exception report is one of the triggers. Because there's an exception report. You won't get an exception report periodically because you don't necessarily have exceptions periodically. You can get a periodic report of the total number of exceptions or of what exceptions there were, but you will not get an exception report on a periodic basis. Now, if you trigger a summation of the exceptions periodically, that will be used to help you decide if the machine's functioning okay, if the operator's an idiot or whatever. Finally, and we've already covered two of the report triggers, periodic and exception, the other is on demand. In most accounting systems, you can trigger an income statement, a balance sheet, a cash flow statement, anytime you want to. Just by telling the software that's what you want. And it gives it to you. It doesn't know any better. And unlike some employees, it doesn't try to goof off like it. It just does it. That brings us to the Because You Asked segment. This is a neat one. We've talked about this before, but as long as it's a problem for somebody out there, we need to talk about it again because it's one of the main causes of business failure. According to my bookkeeper, my business is showing a substantial profit, but I'm finding myself short of cash most of the time. How is this possible, and what can I do about it? Well, it's possible because profit is nothing more than your net sales less your expenses. So you can have a profit without realizing the cash. Do you sell on credit? If so, you could have a lot of receivables. And as a result, be showing a profit, but so much of your sales are still tied up in receivables that you don't have any cash. Also, have you been increasing your inventories? And if so, has it been at the same rate that your sales have increased? If your inventories are increasing faster than your sales, you have to pay for that somehow. And you'll cut yourself short on cash. A third place to look is in the expense column. What are you paying yourself? It could be that you're paying yourself too much for what the business is making right now. And if that's the case, you're going to hurt the business. If you must overpay yourself, at least stand ready to reinvest a lot of it, because otherwise your business is in danger. Finally, take a look at your bill paying policies. If you have a bill that comes in and it's due in 30 days and you pay it in 10, where does that cash come from? See, what you want to do in order to keep from having your cash below the level you want it at a given time is to use what's called float to your advantage. If a bill's due in 30 days, pay it in 30. Not in 25, not in 20, not in 10, but in 30. Unless there's a discount for paying early, and that discount actually lets you purchase that product or that service at a lower cost. Now, when I say a lower cost, consider not the total that you're paying, but the net present value of what you have to pay at that point in the future, and see how that matches up, because that's what's going to matter. Next week, we're going to talk about decision support and expert systems. Until then, just mind your own business.